All right, so I've seen that video a number of times, and there is this one moment where Grant Breitkreutz is kneeling down, and he summarizes this so well. He said, "Mother Nature always wins." And did you see what happened after he said that? Did anybody see it? There was a lightning bolt. I mean, there was no special effects in that. There was nothing added to that afterwards. And so I think the best way to kick this off here is I want to structure this. I'm going to ask the panel one or two questions, and then I want to get to your questions really quickly. So Mother Nature always wins. Dr. Davis, I would like for you to talk a little bit about what that means to you and the soil in your practice.
Just to briefly talk a little bit about the kind of medicine that I practice. For years, probably 10 years, I practiced what I would call pill for problem practice. You came to me with a problem, I looked around and found a pill for it. And I started seeing that people weren't really getting healthier, and then all those pills usually came with a poison or a side effect. And so it was my wife that really encouraged me to find a different path, and so I began to look at integrative and functional medicine, where we really spent time looking for the root cause. And more I kept bumping up against the root cause of food, and that we weren't eating close enough to the ground. And I think Zach Bush talks about probably the best thing we can do is just go out into our gardens and grab stuff right out of the ground and eat it, the way we see animals do that. But as we created this huge company, pharmaceutical industry, they have grabbed a hold of our food production, and our human health is suffering because of it. So I really see, as we can make the soil better, we'll make our food better, and we'll make ourselves better. We deal with so many gut dysfunctions in our clinic that I think this is really the root cause. And I love talking to farmers about this stuff. So I think they are the most resourceful people on the planet, and I'm excited to see about what they can do to turn this around.
Well, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a farmer, I'm a storyteller. And one of the things that I think about in stories is metaphor. And Zach recently spoke about the rise in autoimmune disorders, which is essentially our bodies not identifying ourselves, right? Which is a huge metaphor. And by design, we've essentially done this to ourselves. And Zach will say this out loud, and I will as well. That is perfectly designed, and from a hierarchical standpoint and from a pill-popping standpoint in medicine, it's not working. And we're becoming more and more sick, and nature's design is at a point right now that is reminding us that we're really kind of at a tipping point of re-identifying ourselves as human beings, which is essentially garnering a better relationship to the soil, to our food system, to our health system, and ultimately for humanity.
Mother Nature always wins. Every civilization in the history of mankind that has collapsed because of their degradation of soil. You can read the book by Dr. David Montgomery, Earth, the Erosion of Civilizations, that talks about that. The United States has degraded its soil faster than any civilization in the history of the planet. We have learned nothing in the last few thousand years from our ancestors about what we are doing to our planet. And it's sad that man is so arrogant to think that he can best Mother Nature. She has how many million years of R&D, and we think we can do better. And, we build dams and reservoirs and dikes, and we till and we plow and we spray and we beat her to a pulp, and we wonder why she continues to fight back. And I think whether you believe in climate change or not, you don't have to watch very many headlines to understand that things are changing. Who'd ever heard of a bomb cyclone before this year? Nebraska has 2 of them in 1 month. Crops all over the world either burn up or drown in floods or blizzards. Mother Nature's going to take her planet back. We can either go along for the ride or we can continue to fight her, but she is going to win.
So let's kind of open this up. I feel like we've introduced a lot of topics. We've introduced a lot of different angles on what the film was about. And, you know, the film Farmer's Footprint, that was Redwood Falls, Minnesota. And like I mentioned, these are just farmers that you can know and meet and relate to. So right off the bat, do we have any questions right now for the panel? It's okay, it's hard to be the first question. Anybody have any questions about that? So Grant and Dawn, how many years have they been doing this? I would say less than 5 as far as regenerative agriculture.
3 years.
Yeah, and I've heard Grant talk a time or two. There's been a few things that he went into regenerative agriculture cold turkey, and then there's a few things that he's adopted slowly. So we can kind of talk a little bit about that. I mean, one of the first steps that I hear guys talk a lot is considering no-till farming. And if you've never considered that on your operation, there's so many resources now to kind of get into no-till farming. And then the second would be cover crop agriculture. And raise your hand if you're into cover crops. Anybody? Okay, get some hands raised. Raise your hand if you're cover crop curious. So you kind of want to learn a little bit more about that, okay? Okay, that's a good way to talk about it. Gail, do you want to talk about how you incorporate some of the principles of regenerative agriculture?
For us on our farm, it's about following the template that nature set. So we try to observe what we see growing in nature and emulate that on our farm. It started out purely as annual crops, you know, like buckwheat or sorrel rye, things like that you plant once and they mature and die, just like corn or soybeans. And they work very well. And the more diversity we can get, the more we can emulate what Mother Nature's doing in her system, and the more synergisms we bring to the system. What we found, though, when you really start to study photosynthesis and the water cycle, the mineral cycle, nutrient density in food, annuals are great, but when you look at nature, annuals are a very small part. Most of nature is built in perennial systems, very diverse and almost all perennial, with some speckled annuals. And so we took cover crops a step further. We're now using or utilizing perennial cover crops on our farm and working on growing the annual crops within the perennial system so we can more emulate what Mother Nature does.
Okay, the question was to Gail, can you give some examples of what different crops you're focusing on in your perennial system?
Sure, there's a couple of models, and I'm certainly not the guy that invented this, so I'm not taking credit for it. I just was fortunate enough to meet some people, but there's been some models, and in South America, they were working on planting native grasses, grazing or haying the native grasses for a few years, and then bringing out of native grasses back into crop production for a couple of years, and switch back, kind of keeping Mother Nature off balance, bringing perennials in for long periods. The system I'm working with is called pasture cropping. It was invented by a guy in Australia called Colin Seiss. And basically what Colin does, so, you know, like the Flint Hills, for example, it's basically warm season native pasture. So what Colin would do on his farm, he would plant cool season annual crops. He wants to stand up for soil. So what Colin does, he would plant cool season annuals into his warm season pastures, or warm season annuals into his cool season pastures. When the pasture is going dormant, he's planting an annual crop to harvest for grain. The cool thing about Colin is he has his brother just across the fence on the same family farm they grew up on, so they've been able to document finances, soil, and everything on this farm. Colin's grain yields match his brother's bushel for bushel with 0 inputs. Plus, Colin is grazing sheep 3 to 4 times a year on the same acres, where the brother is just spending money buying chemicals. And it's also been documented that because we're standing up for soil, Colin is probably the master of growing soil. They've documented he's grown 30 inches of topsoil in 20 years doing this practice. When soil scientists, and I've been in rooms with Colin, with academia, when they have called him a liar, because we can't do this. But we are, and we're documenting it.
That's really great. We have another question over here.
So you're doing exactly the opposite. Instead of losing the soil, you're growing the soil.
Exactly, yeah. The whole goal, and on our farm, we certainly can't we can't show the same results that Colin has, but we've grown several inches of topsoil in 10 or 20 years. And there are now guys starting to document it, and some of the soil scientists are starting to come on board and seeing that, yes, we are growing soil much, much faster than we ever thought possible 10 or 15 years ago. There's a really dark message in all of this. There's really a huge message of hope. We can do this really fast once we get farmers on board.
So I've got a question here and it pertains to the physician we have here tonight. You know, it talked in there about back in 1965, 4% of the population had a chronic illness. And now we're at 46% of the children having a chronic illness. What are you seeing on a regional basis here in Kansas? I'm assuming you work primarily on a regional basis, or maybe you do nationwide, but what are you seeing here in Kansas on that?
Yeah, so we have 2 clinics, one's in Wichita and then we have another in Hutchinson. And I would say on average around a third of kids are on a chronic daily medication. And that is shocking to see that change. But, diagnosis, you could say, you can make the case that, well, we're just getting better at diagnosing things and that's why kids have more chronic illness, but we've never had kids use medications on a daily basis like we are now. And so I think the kids are really suffering. And, we have a whole section of our clinic just dedicated to taking care of what we call special needs kids. And it's heartbreaking to see what it does to families. So it's a big problem.
What are the most prevalent illnesses that you're treating kids for?
What are the most?
Yeah, what are the most prevalent illnesses? I like to call them the 4 A's. So allergies, asthma, autism, ADHD. ADD, ADHD. It's tough to walk into a room and not find a kid who has one of those going on. But eczema, I was talking with some of our dinner guests tonight saying that, I talked to school nurses who've been doing this for 30 years, and they said back in the day they may have 1 or 2 kids they needed to hold an inhaler for, and now they've got entire cabinets designed to keep all these medications. They're literally running pharmacies in schools. The kids are scheduled and coming in and taking meds, and that didn't used to be.
So, just as a mother too, in the school systems, it's heartbreaking because we just started a new school this year, and you get the lists, you get the food allergy lists, and these aren't parents just deciding their kids aren't going to eat mangoes or deciding that their kids can't have peanuts. This is anaphylactic, might die situation, and we get the list sent home from school of what you can and cannot do. And I know we personally quit sending any peanuts or peanut butter for our kids. It's a freaking peanut butter sandwich, folks, and we can't send it to school to our kids. So, Nicole.
I just want to add a little bit. I think it's really important to understand a little bit of what these chemicals are doing to us. There's a lot of science, and a lot of the reason why there's a rise in functional medicine is by virtue of what's happening to our microbiome. So glyphosate, as Zach mentioned, is a water-soluble toxin, which is very, very scary. And essentially 1/1000th of this chemical is actually hitting the plant, and the rest of it is evaporating, going into our clouds, raining, and going into our water system, and ultimately breaking open our membrane to our biome that is allowing this level of inflammation. So all these diseases that Dr. Davis is talking about, whether it's Parkinson's or cancer or Alzheimer's, I myself personally, and half of my friends are dealing with cancer. My father has Parkinson's. I'm sure many of you are dealing with diseases. Actually, can I get a show of hands that are actually personally dealing with it, or have somebody close to you that are dealing with a major disease? Yeah, so that's a good 60%. We were talking about this at dinner. This is not normal. This isn't normal. And, if you're 35 or older, when we were growing up, we never heard of cancer. And so, anyway, I just wanted to reiterate kind of the science around the microbiome and the importance of understanding that, a lot of which, the reason why functional medicine is growing, and the importance of our food and sitting in an operation like this of growing real food and essentially that being medicinal and still very necessary.
So food is our medicine, right guys?
Okay, I was just wondering what you might suggest in how we might scale up the adoption of regenerative agriculture. Because we really don't have a whole lot of time in terms of human health and climate. You know, we know that regenerative agriculture sequesters carbon and makes people healthy, makes water healthy, makes air healthy at the same time. And so, how do we get this adoption to come along faster than it is?
There's a couple of things to me that just popped to mind, and you know, we farmers today are driven by an ag program that you are all funding with your tax dollars to degrade the soil and destroy nutrient density in food, so industry can make profit, plain and simple. And I really feel for customers of Jayco and other regenerative farms, because you guys understand the difference, and you're willing to pay extra for your food, but you're still having to pay the taxes to subsidize the other programs, and it's not fair. And there's a lot of talk about we need to change policy, and yes, policy needs changed, but we are not going to change DC. I don't care left or right. This change is going to happen right here in this room with you. You've got to educate yourself so that you can educate your neighbors. The more people we have purchasing from Jayco or farmers markets or whatever, this will snowball. This is the only way we're going to do this is with a grassroots movement with more and more people, and then we can change policy. And from a farmer perspective, and we talk about this a lot, and I cannot explain to you folks as consumers who are not farmers the peer pressure that farmers are under. They are wonderful people. They have been caught in a fight that's not about them, and they have been pushed to the limit. They're killing themselves from depression. Kansas is losing 25-year-olds faster than any state in the nation. You know, there's some real issues going on in agriculture that they've just got to the point where their margins are so slim, and the peer pressure because their agronomist is their brother or their neighbor or their brother-in-law, and it's pretty hard to fire those people when your goals aren't the same. So those are the two things that come to my mind.
I think this and more of this, and ultimately talking to each other more and more, and really breaking down the facts and exactly what Gail was speaking to in terms of, I mean, here we are in Kansas, 90% of which is farmland. You're importing 90% of your food. That's insane. That is an insane industrial complex, right? Less than 1% of our farmers are eating their own food. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. So coming up with, you know, real facts about what's happening to farmers, which I've just come to have just complete reverence for, and especially just in this short story with Grant and Don, I mean, they're under tremendous pressure and ostracized, and the remedy for that is community, is talking to each other. This film's available online. You can share it with anyone. There's a ton of stuff with Gabe Brown. His book, Dirt to Soil, is incredible. The World Wildlife Fund just put out a really great piece of Gabe Brown's. It's short, it's 4 minutes, but he just nails it and just gets straight to it. Education, and working with each other. And what Don says in the community is that, you know, the consumers are driving the bus here. So we have to create the demand for this market to grow. I think a lot about the grass-fed movement. That was all people-powered. That's an amazing thing that had nothing to do with certification or subsidies or government programs. That was simply people-powered. So, yeah, power up.
Power up.
I think I know this doesn't answer the question of how do you get started, but I think for everybody in the food the decisions you make in the grocery store are really important. You know, we talk to people about trying to stay away from food that comes out of a bag, a box, a can, over the counter, or through a window. Now, when I say that to people, most people look at me and go, well, that's everything I eat. So the other thing I tell people is if it has more than 3 ingredients, it might not be food. Try to find food that doesn't have a label. So, you know, if we all started eating that way, Jayco would be overrun with customers, and they would be telling their friends, we need more. We need more people doing this. So it really, the consumer, the dollar does drive a lot of decision, and I think we can turn it around, but we have to start doing it in the grocery store.
I think these three nailed it, and I have, as they're talking, I had two words that kind of came into my brain, and the question is, how do we scale this up? And these two words just keep popping up, and it's compassion and humility. Because each one of us up here has had to deal with this concept of humbling ourselves, because we all didn't start out doing this. None of us started out doing this. This wasn't the path that we started for ourselves. And in a lot of ways, for some of us, it's not the path that it's constantly putting us out of our comfort zone. And I talked to Robin and I talked to Daniel about this, and it's like we think we find this comfort zone, and then we go, oh, we got to push further. We got to move out of it. We got to keep going. So for me, it's not the best answer, but compassion and humility. It's compassion for our neighbors, humility for our own ways, and understanding that change is hard, change is messy. There's a reason why not everybody makes changes, because it's just a process. And so changing the minds of folks is probably how we do this. We start by talking in a real down-to-earth, humbling, compassionate way. So do we have any other questions? Yeah, Floyd.
You talked about the 4 A's in children with the most prevalent issues. What is your cure or treatment for those? And with that question is, how much is that connected to gut microbiome?
Oh, I think that the connection to the gut is huge. You know, if you think about your small bowel, which is the longest, 22 feet long in humans, most humans, the surface area inside the small bowel, because of the folding of the villi and the microvilli, the surface area is the size of 2 tennis courts. Now, the thickness of that barrier, what separates us from the inside world to the outside world, is half the width of a human hair. So we're talking about something that is delicate as cellophane. It's the size of 2 tennis courts, and what we eat is spread out over that. That's a critical barrier that glyphosate and many other chemicals disrupt. And when we blow holes in that, we begin to have things leaking through, and our immune system begins reacting to those things. And as our immune system is reacting to food, we get what's called molecular mimicry, and we begin attacking our thyroid, we begin attacking our skin, we begin attacking our joints. So that's the autoimmune disease. And you know, that barrier is similar to what we see in the brain. So a lot of the inflammatory conditions we see in the brain mimic what's happening in the gut. So I think for us, with these complicated kids, how we start with them is we first start assessing their gut. You know, you can probably jump in and start working on a lot of different things, and every case is different. You have to take an individual approach. Just like if you walked into somebody's farm who's doing monoculture, you'd probably have to think about what's unique in that land to turn it around. We have to do the same thing with those kids and all of our patients, really. Yeah, the gut is very, very important.
So that makes me think we're talking about the gut terrain, but we're also talking about the soil terrain. Isn't it cool how connected all that is? The microbiome of the soil and the microbiome of our guts. I totally dig that. So what other questions do we have out here? Go ahead.
I have a comment to the person who asked how to get started. Find an expert and go to their clinic. We did that this spring on cell grazing, and it was awesome. We went to Greg Judy's cell grazing school.
I would reiterate that for farmers, by farmers. I have not learned, I learned the absolute most boots on the ground in the field, digging the soil. Gail, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, and as a consumer, you can still learn a lot at a lot of these conferences. It's not just for farmers. If you're going to educate yourself, it's a great place to go so that you can educate your neighbors and your family.
So all of us here, we all have concerns, questions, curiosity. We wouldn't be here. And I hear everyone talking about all this wealth of knowledge and information that's floating around out there. Is anyone aware of, say, a central clearinghouse or a coordination center where you can look for this information? And some of us, I'm a dinosaur. I'm not familiar with social media, the internet. I can spend countless hours looking for something, and if I do find it, I've already forgotten what I was looking for. So I was curious, does anybody know if there's, point us in one direction, an information center, whatever you'd like to call it, where we can browse through and look for what we need?
Yeah, so I have a couple ideas on that. Part of the question was how do we get this information? How do we make sure that it's spreading? And I kind of think about this two ways. The first way is social media is huge and YouTube is huge, but I understand that not everybody is going to utilize that. And so you're right, there does have to be a central aspect to this education and this learning, and there's a couple groups that stick out in my mind of who are doing this. We have the Soil Health Academy that were featured in this film. It's Ray Archuleta, Gabe Brown, and Dr. Alan Williams, and they have assembled this team of technical advisors that are grazing experts, cover crop experts, agronomists, etc. So they're doing it, but you know what? They can't scale up what we need, and so we need more boots on the ground. Gail Fuller hosts an annual, sometimes twice a year, field school that we do. I also, a part of answering this question too is I think you need to also be looking for independent resources. So there's a part of me that's like, let's have a centralized place for information. Sometimes those can be bought and sold. And so my favorite thing to do is some of the book lists that we have, and I don't know how much time we have or if we've completely blown our time. I could review them, or I could meet you out at the bonfire and I could review my book list with all of you.
So I would add one thing to that, and I've followed a guy named Joel Salatin for years. This is kind of how I learned about this, and one thing I've heard him say is don't read any textbook written after 1940. Is that right? Something like that. And so I think there's wisdom in the old way of doing things, and here at Jayco they've got a beautiful blending of the old way of doing things with modern things like electric fencing, the chicken tractors.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good books, and maybe it's an idea for Kings to start adding a book to the email list. Every email goes out, tell us what you're reading.
And I think ultimately you don't be afraid to ask your neighbor a question. If you can find, what I have found most of the time when I think I have a differing opinion by somebody, if I just go in and ask a question, a lot of times I'm blown away that maybe I had a preconceived notion about their opinion that wasn't even true. So ask strangers weird questions.
And I think we were going to send a follow-up email to everyone that was here tonight just so you can get some of those resources. So if you RSVP'd, we will send that to you. If you didn't and you want that, let one of us know and we can get you on that email list, okay?
Okay, let's take one more question. Do we have another question from the audience?
What was the yield on them 12 rows on the farmer?
Oh, the yield on the 12 rows. Hey, buddy, how are you? Hey, that's a great idea, and this is such a shameless plug that I'm about to do. So, and I'm going to do it anyway. Grant and Dawn Bright Fruits, they do speaking engagements, and so that crop would have been harvested a year ago this fall. Grant and Dawn are going to be coming to Soil Health U this year. That's going to be in Salina in January, and I do have some flyers on that. So I am coordinating the content this year for Soil Health U. So sorry about that. That was my shameless plug. January 22nd and 23rd, they're going to be in Kansas. And they are some of the most real folks that you could talk to, and they're going to tell you the nitty-gritty, and they're going to tell you what worked, and they're going to tell you what didn't work. And so that would be a good time to ask them. And we've been to a lot of conferences. I do a lot of work with a lot of you out here, and I always joke that we need a failures session. Can we just have a session where we all sit around and talk about failures? Because sometimes you learn the most in that space. So if anybody wants to invite me to talk about failure, I will come and facilitate a failure session. So the bar's low. Let's go ahead and wrap up for right now. I wanted to finish. Yes, you can.
This goes back to why we're here, and what Daniel and Robin and Ken and Judy have done, and Don and Grant and others. It is not easy for a farmer to open up their farms, their homes, their fields, for you to come kick through and look at their failures as well as their successes. I can tell you it's extremely difficult. It's not easy to do. So one thing you can do is thank the farmer. Anytime you get a chance to look at their property, thank them for what they're doing, ask questions. They're not afraid of the hard questions. Ask away. Ask them the hard question and talk about it at the coffee shop. But it takes a lot of guts for people to open their homes up to us.
So final thoughts, you guys want to take a final thought here?
Just more appreciation for the folks here, and we got here last night, and Gail's been raving about this place for quite a while. He's like, "You're not gonna believe it," and I can't believe it. I can't believe the place. Yeah, we should. It's really stunning, and I've been navigating this regenerative space for 2 years now by virtue of telling the story and more future stories to come, and many people don't quite know what to do, right? I mean, there's a tremendous amount of money in it. There's hundreds and millions of dollars. There's huge impact investors. It's moving very fast, which is all very exciting, but I think at the end of the day, nature's operating system requires us to observe. It requires us to connect to each other. It requires not necessarily naming it, but rather doing exactly what's happening on this farm, which is trust and connection and abiding by nature's operating system, and which is the way fungi works. And speaking of metaphors, if we all were to participate in the understanding of regenerative principles, whether it's a farm or whether it's a banking system or an education system or a medical system, there's actually a stunning white paper by a gentleman called John Fullerton of the Capital Institute out of Boulder. And he came from J.P. Morgan. He came from a very big understanding of monetary value and then started understanding regenerative principles. And he said, we have to apply this to every single system of our life. And again, I just wanted to reiterate, we're sitting on land in an operation system and multiple families that are abiding by it, and it's working. It's working. And it's just really, anyway, very honored to be here and very grateful for you all for what you've done. And for all of you for caring, really caring.
My closing statement would be I'd like for you guys to put me out of business. Really, I think if people started eating more plants that grow above ground, eating animals that live in pastures that are eating the way God intended them to eat, then that would happen, is that I would be out of the job. That would be a great thing. I'd probably go into farming. So, thank you for having me.
Everybody, we can head on out to the bonfire, and all of us will be out there. I'm going to give you one last statement here. And it's not there. Oh, it's a great picture. Okay. When I first got here, I had no idea all of you were going to be here. I had no idea. I thought maybe 100 people. I had no idea that this crowd was going to be so big. And so I saw Ken when I got here, and he said, "Oh, Jessica, that's going to be so much seed to spread, right, out in the field. I hope we have enough seed." And it just made me think, this is our seed that we're spreading, all of you. So we are planting you, and we're going to send you all out, and we want you to reseed the pasture. So thank you, and this is our closing quote: the future belongs to the few of us who are still willing to get our hands dirty. So thank you very much.